Good evening and welcome everybody to this meeting of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Monday the 8th of January 2024. I'll go straight to the agenda. Item 55, do we have any apologies, Lucianne?
Yes, we have apologies from Jane Ainsley, and she has sent her substitute. Councillor Chris Johnson is here on her behalf.
Thank you, and thank you for attending, Chris. Item 56, minutes of the previous meeting, 1st of November 2023. I noted one, I think is a correction, on page 7, item 43. We need to correct the previous meeting to the 6th of September, not the 6th of November. So if that could be done, please. There will be a number of matters arising out of those minutes. These will mostly be covered under agenda item 68, which is our action tracker. Are there any other corrections or amendments members wish to request? I don't see any hands raised, so at the end of this meeting, I will sign the minutes. Okay. Item 57, declarations of interest. No declarations of interest, thank you. Item 58, public question from Mr. Amit Mehta. Is Mr. Mehta with us online? Okay, okay.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Amit, and thank you very much for your question and for joining us this evening. Would you like to read out your question, please?
Sure, thank you. Yes, so one of the safety wall work stream is an EOTAS dedicated focus project on alternatives to EOTAS after 2 terms and clear intervention and support via AP to reduce long-term EOTAS package and cost. I have looked through the Wokingham Borough and DFE safety wall agreement, and there is no specific mention around EOTAS. So I'm trying to understand, as this work stream is LA initiated, and what impact analysis have LA or local authorities done which gives them the confidence that the impact of this work stream would most likely be a positive one on SEND children who have very specific needs and hence they are on EOTAS.
Good. Thank you very much, Amit. And just for clarification, okay, the references in your question to AP as alternate provision and EOTAS, education other than at or in schools. Very important matter, so thank you for raising these. Whilst the AP and EOTAS review project is not recorded in Wokingham's Safety Valve Agreement, published by the Department for Education, the project has always been part of the Deficit Management Plan and the wider programme of activities designed to deliver a high quality and sustainable SEND system for the area. We are an inclusive authority, and our starting point is that for the vast majority of children and young people, being in school or college provides the best outcomes as evidence supports, and that many of the parents of children with an EOTAS package have told us that earlier opportunities to support their child were missed, and that they have ended up with an EOTAS package as a last resort, not a desired outcome. Therefore, our intention through the AP and EOTAS review is to ensure that early intervention through a range of measures should be focused on reintegrating young people into school, and that this will thereby minimise the numbers ending up with an EOTAS package. This is not focused on ceasing existing packages, but is expected to have the result of reducing the frequency with which they are required going forward. We would not plan to stop commissioning a provision which is beneficial for a child's learning, but if more appropriate options for young people on EOTAS packages are identified, then we will seek in dialogue with families to reintegrate these young people back into education settings. Assessment of need and decisions regarding the most suitable provision will be carried out as part of the annual review cycle in terms of individual cases. I hope that you would agree that any EOTS package should be regularly reviewed to check whether it is benefiting the child for whom it is provided. Mr. Mehta, would you like to ask a supplementary question?
I mean, it's a rather lengthy reply, but I think I'll try and see. But now, I think one of the things you in the reply mentioned to support our early intervention with range of measures and look for the unused opportunities which exist now with regards to alternate provisioning. So, is there a list of alternate provisioning providers which the SEN team are looking to provision as part of early intervention? And I guess some details around those providers would definitely assist in trying to understand, I guess, the medium to long term vision what SEN team is proposing through these measures.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. I'm wondering if there is anyone present here tonight. I don't think Ming is with us tonight, is he? He is? Okay. I'm wondering, Ming, are you able to answer that question?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me properly? I have problem lock on my
yes, thank you.
computer. I use another alternative device. Apology for that. Yes, it's a work in progress. We do have a list of all APs, both local authority use and the school are using. What I'm doing at the moment, we want to quality assure each of them to make sure we will give some kind of advice to school who use the AP or local authority ourselves using them. So to answer your question, to put it simple, we do have a list of all AP that both local authority and school are using.
Thank you very much, Ming. Mr. Mehta, please do continue, okay, to talk with us, okay. If you have any further questions or if there are any matters with which we might be able to assist, because we want to get it right and to do always what is in the best interests of of every child. So please don't hesitate to continue this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 59, member questions. We have no member questions. Item 60, the Youth Council. Now, members will be aware that we were really looking forward to another visit from members of our Youth Council. They have been unable to attend tonight due to other commitments, primarily school commitments, mock examinations and so forth, and would like to either postpone their visit to our March meeting or possibly invite members to attend a meeting of the Youth Council. Personally, I think that the latter, might be a very useful exercise, and I think it would enable us, if we chose, to take up that option, to see the Youth Council in full flow, okay. And also, to engage with the dialogue, that is so important. So what I'm going to ask, if it's okay with members, if we could just have a show of hands of those who would be happy to participate if we were invited to attend a Youth Council meeting. It's not committing yourself to this, but it's just an indicative vote. How many of you would be interested, happy, to do that? Okay, so I will get back to and I will get back to them with that. But the important thing is, that we, fit around, all of their other sort of activities and needs and so forth. So thank you for that. Okay.
Chair, I'm just wondering, sorry, Chair, I'm just wondering if I could give a very brief update. So the Member of Youth Parliament elections for Wokingham are happening on the 23rd of January. So this will be taking place in the council chamber, and we will be, there may be an opportunity to witness some of that in action. So it's really for members of the committee to be aware of this youth parliament process that's happening later this month. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Helen. And Lucian, I wonder if you might be able to email all of the members, because there are some who are not here tonight, and indeed other councillors, who might wish to observe that activity.
Chair, just in case of my lack of clarity, that was really for information. Yes, because it's quite a private process, I believe. So I think really that was for members' information that we're going through that process. I know Sarah Desson is very keen for members of this committee to go to a proper youth council meeting. Thank you. Sorry about lack of clarity.
Okay, and sorry I misunderstood. So we will not be attending the elections. Thank you. Okay. Item 61, safety valve update. A verbal report. Who is presenting this?
Jonathan, Chair.
Jonathan.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jonathan. Nice to see you again.
Good evening, everyone. I'm on my mobile connection, so I'm hoping it remains stable because I'm having trouble with my home broadband. But I'm going to share a very brief presentation, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Is that visible to everyone?
Yes, it is.
So I thought I'd summarise. We're now 9 months into our safety valve programme. We had the confirmation back in March. So 9 months in, we've done a kind of end of year summary set of headlines in terms of where we're up to. This has come from our most recent report back to the DfE, which we submitted in December. So these are the kind of headlines from that summary, that monitoring report back to the DfE, and I thought it remained consistent with what we're saying tonight. So what's been achieved in the first 9 months of the programme? I mean, we've got a lot of developments have happened in a fairly short space of time, so I won't read through these line by line, but I'll certainly send this presentation out for a note. But around early intervention and demand management, we've had several initiatives in that arena. We've piloted the vulnerable learners panel. That's led to some changes we've made now, and there's a new model emerging that I'll be taking to schools forum later this week, and we'll get that signed off there, and I'll come back to you with the sort of final version once that's agreed. We've got a new area Senko service. Our area Senko, I'm pleased to say, started last week and will now be out engaging with schools. We'll be recruiting some seconded Senkos to work as part of that team in the next few weeks. We've got a new outreach model for speech and language. We've increased our investment in social, emotional, mental health and autism outreach. We've got more capacity in early years, new inclusion training for early years settings as well. And we've got our new local offer coordinator. So, lots and lots of new investment and activity in that arena. In terms of new provision, these are the headlines. Obviously, the committee will be familiar with much of this. But we've now, I think, possibly since the last I spoke to you, we've awarded our first round of resource spaces to primary schools. And we had schools that applied for that and put expressions of interest in, and we've now agreed the first few of those, which are due to be ready and developed for September this year. Obviously, we had Addington open their satellite site back in October. We had Oaktree open. We have our 2 new free schools, as you'll be well aware. We've also developed new guidance around preparation for adulthood, and we've appointed a new coordinator for our preparation for adulthood sort of age range. That's post 16 and upwards. Around commissioning and quality assurance, we've had new investment in our commissioning team, which has enabled us to develop an alternative provision pilot. So we're piloting a new model there, which very much relates to that EOTAS response we referenced already in this meeting. We've got a seconded head teacher working on developing that project. We've got a targeted approach to quality monitoring of our alternative provision providers. We've managed as well to keep our independent sector providers at below inflationary increases. I mean, compared to our neighbours and compared to most of the country, who are seeing in some cases double-digit percentage increases in their fees, we've managed through good work with partnership with our providers to keep those at a lower level. And we're working closely with partners in health and social care to ensure we're making the most of our joint funding, because I think historically perhaps education put rather more compared to other areas. Education tend to fund rather more of those joint funded initiatives. We think that we ought to be able to get slightly more contribution from our partners elsewhere, and we're currently seeking, pursuing those. We've also done a lot of internal work in terms of things like our panel processes, our data analysis, and our use of data has massively improved. And we had our agreement with Schools Forum to fund a 0.5% high needs schools block transfer. So there's been, as we're well aware, a lot of activity. I don't think I'll dwell on this slide now, but you can have a look at it. This is really showing how we've seen change. Our work and our focus on early intervention, the intention behind that is to reduce the need for pupils to jump straight into an education, health and care plan. That we think there are many of our children who are getting an EHC plan or applying for one, who with earlier intervention probably could have had their needs met at an earlier stage. And we're showing that with that increase in provision, we've managed to keep, other than there was a huge spike in March, which was reflected also with our colleagues in social care. We had a big spike in demand for 1 month in March. But other than that anomaly, we've had lower levels of demand every month since, more or less. I mean, broadly speaking, every month since we kept our trajectory a slightly lower level than it was this time last year. We're also closely monitoring the sort of source of those referrals. We think, we are conscious that it's almost a 50-50 split between school requests and parent-led requests. And we are certainly engaging with our parent community. That's slightly higher than average proportion of parental requests compared to other areas. So we're working hard to engage our parent community in understanding what's triggering some of those requests, when we might think we can intervene earlier and reduce that. Moving on, so these are the headlines from our report back to the DfE recently. I mean, the thing I'll also highlight, the comments back from our SEND advisor, our safety valve advisor, were very positive. He said we've done a good job at presenting the progress we've made, and he can see how much work was going on in changing our approaches. We haven't yet had a formal response from the formal. That was almost informal verbal feedback in advance of the actual submission. So we haven't had a formal response, but we're expecting a fairly positive. We've had certainly warm words and positive words about the work we're doing. We are on track to achieve a balanced budget by 2028-29. There has been some financial slippage, but not a huge amount. And the DfE, we don't see it as a big cause of concern. We can get back on track. All the other stats are moving in the right direction. The money and the spending will tend to follow behind in terms of the financial impact of some of these changes. So we've seen that 15% reduction in requests for assessment, a lower number being converted to an EHC plan. That's because we think we can offer better and more appropriate interventions below that level. We've been ceasing EHC. I know there's been concern about us ceasing EHC plans, but actually it's a perfect natural part of the process, and certainly when young people get to post 16, if they're not moving on to an education placement, it's the right thing to do. So we've had 94 of those ceased this year, which was our target, or slightly ahead of target, but broadly in keeping with our target. Also really important to stress and to note that 51% of our EHC plans are supported in mainstream education settings. That is a real positive story there in terms of inclusion. We know there's a lot to do in terms of supporting our mainstream colleagues with addressing those, because that's a big growth in terms of numbers in mainstream. And we're working very closely with colleagues there to ensure that they feel able to support those needs and meet those needs. And broadly speaking, in terms of numbers, we're on track. We're broadly on track for our target number of EHC plans, in terms of the targets were set with the DfE. So broadly speaking, fairly positive news in terms of the safety valve, program. There are, of course, inevitably a number of concerns, and I thought it'd be worth highlighting some of those here. Or the headline risks and issues we are aware of and concerns that we're facing. Just to say that we have requested from the Department of Education that we want to lead the capital build programme for our 2 new special free schools. We know that the DfE's capital team have been really overwhelmed with issues arising from the rack concrete scandal or emergency that you'll be conscious of. It had a lot of media coverage fairly recently before Christmas. We've requested that we lead the process. They haven't yet made a decision on that, and we're really pressing them to reach that decision because we think it will significantly improve our chances of opening them by the time frame we wish to. And we're concerned if they choose to lead the process themselves, that the huge pressures on their time will potentially delay these build processes. So that's something we'll watch this space. We'll keep you informed as to whether we get the right decision there. We're also very conscious, and I know that colleagues around the table will be aware of this in terms of your post boxes and your email traffic. We know there's a lot of concern in the parental community around some of the operational changes. There's a lot of concern around safety valves, a programme nationally and locally. Now we're trying to address that with our sort of more positive coverage. We think our local story here is a very positive one in terms of increased investment and service improvement. But nonetheless, we are seeing parents who are very wary of trusting some of the changes we're making and are concerned about some of the changes to the provision, and we are seeing as a result of that increased level of appeals to SEND tribunal and indeed more requests for mediation. You would expect a change process like this to trigger a level of anxiety in the parent community. So, it's worth paying. We are certainly paying attention to that and certainly conscious of that and certainly want to work with our parent community to make sure that we address those concerns. So that can be done through improved communication and making a better account really of giving a full account of what we're doing, why these are such positive measures really. Really from a young person and parents' point of view, this will result in a better system locally. The other kind of risk or area of concern worth highlighting, we are reviewing our tripartite funding across health and social care. For our most complex cases, you expect them to be a kind of 3-way split of funding for some of those most complex cases. We think benchmarking us with similar areas, we don't perhaps get quite as many cases tripartite funded or even bi-funded between two of the parties. And we are reviewing that to see whether we're getting that full and appropriate contribution from all our colleagues. Because at the moment, I think education is probably paying a greater proportion of the total cost of some of those complex cases than you might expect to see. But we are reviewing that at the moment and negotiating with health on that. There's also a view held by many schools and indeed many families that our local ordinarily available health provision does not meet local needs. So there are major delays in terms of access to some of the services locally, and obviously that can have a knock-on impact in terms of needs in school and indeed our colleagues in school. So again, we're working closely with health colleagues to ensure we address or do our utmost to address and to support health where possible to address some of those barriers and delays. So those are things that are in focus, I think, for the programme as a whole. I'm not, ringing alarm bells about those, but I thought it's good to bring them here so you're conscious of the kind of particular areas that we're focused on. I thought I'd give a very quick update on the SEND strategy. Last time I came, I spoke about the SEND strategy. We did release an initial draft, as you know, because I came to you last time and went through that initial draft. That had input from schools, parents and carers, and indeed young people themselves. That should say SEND, I realise. We did have a request when we presented those, though, that initial draft. Feedback from health colleagues was that they wanted more opportunities to co-produce the final strategy. They didn't feel they'd had enough opportunity to input, and we are now going to be holding 3 co-production workshops, one for the first 3 months of this year, and we'll come back to you in April for the final destination that get into executive for the 30th of May 2024. So we've actually slightly postponed the presentation of that final version for May 2024, but that's okay. The current strategy still covers us for that time frame, but we thought we'd come back to you with an updated time frame for that. I'll stop my presentation there. That's a fairly quick overview, but yes, and I'm happy to take any questions on any of those matters.
If I could just get people's hands up first. So Anne, Graham, anyone else in the first round of questions? Okay, thank you. Anne, thank you. Oh, sorry. Firstly, thank you very much, Jonathan. For a very, very pithy report. Okay, really clear and concise. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jonathan. I was just going to ask about the parental resistance. Is that to do with, or is some of it to do with EHCPs being ceased or not being agreed to? Is it that sort of thing?
It does tend to be. We are, as I mentioned, we've ceased. We are. I mean, it's no more than we would normally expect to see. A system of this size, you'd expect, and obviously young people get to the end of their time in education and you cease plans. It's a natural part of the process. But sometimes if not enough steps have been put into place, or there's a feeling of a not a clear pathway into adulthood, understandably, some parents can become very concerned or anxious about those next steps for the young people. So we are working closely with the colleagues in adult services on the one hand, and with our wider Optalis, for example, in terms of routes into employment, to ensure we have a wider range of pathways for young people. But there's no sense in maintaining an EHC plan if the young person's moving out of their time in education, and therefore sometimes it's the right thing to do to step those plans down. That can trigger some anxiety. And at the other end of the spectrum, on those initial requests for assessment, what we found is, and what schools have told us, and indeed families have told us, is if there's a view that the young person has needs and there's the parent may not feel that those needs are being met, they may leapfrog almost straight to a request for assessment. We are doing our utmost to ensure that those earlier steps are properly worked through, because many of these needs can be met at an earlier stage. We're working with colleagues in health, with our schools themselves, the things like the area Senko team that we've invested in. All of these things are there to ensure that schools have the right support, insight, and advice to ensure those needs can be met at an earlier stage. And we are being very, very rigorous about making sure that children have had that support at an early stage as possible. And that means sometimes we can slightly put the brakes on in terms of issuing an EHC plan when we think there may be you should have at least 2 terms of activity of trying earlier interventions to see whether those needs can be met and addressed. And we are really being rather more, I think historically perhaps been rather quick to sweep children through and issue an EHC plan without as much scrutiny of what's happened prior. But at the moment we are making sure that process has been really, really rigorous. And sometimes parents are rather, can be perturbed or feel that we're dismissing those needs or blocking access. That's not the case. It's just about making sure that the children's needs are met at the right and appropriate stage, by schools wherever possible before escalating up to the EHC plan level. And that inevitably is causing a little bit of concern within the parent community. And I mean, if I'm frank, it's what you might expect to see with a change of this significance and this shift. We have to build that trust that the parents can actually, once they can see visibly those early intervention approaches are working and are in place and are visible, then I think that we'll bring them with us. But just at the moment, as the change is happening, there's something of an anxious reaction sometimes to a slightly slower agreement toward an EHC plan.
Oh, thanks very much for that. So when the EHCPs tend to only cease when the child is transitioning to adulthood, they wouldn't stop in the middle of primary school or something like that.
There are occasions where a child's needs have either stabilised, or that an intervention such as speech and language intervention has stabilised that child's needs, and you can on occasion decide to cease at an earlier stage. But the vast majority, I'd say more than 90% of those cessations, probably 95% of those cessations, tend to be at the latter end of a child's journey. It's not commonplace for a child to have an EHC plan ceased earlier. It does happen, and there are good reasons for that, but that's done as a result of the annual review process. If you can see that child's needs have stabilised, they're actually progressing very well and making good educational progress, then there are occasions when you might just decide to cease the plan earlier, but that's certainly not the normal pathway.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for presenting a very complex subject in such a cogent way. I'm testing my hearing and my understanding, so I'm not saying that you got the clarity wrong. I think it's my brain probably. And I heard two different things. One is that we're seeking from our partners a greater contribution because education is bearing the brunt of the funding. And then at a different point, what I heard was that the partners want to get more involved, and therefore the action has been taken for January, February and March, that they're contributing more to the strategy. Do you think there's a correlation between those two things?
That's a very cogent observation, I'd say. Yes, I mean, I think Health felt they wanted to have more ability to impact on the final SEND strategy. I don't know quite what form that will take. I think a lot of work went into co-production, but Health themselves felt they hadn't perhaps had enough opportunity to comment and shape some of those things. I guess what I'd say is some of the responses we need to see across our offer are undoubtedly related to our health offer. I'm sure health colleagues would agree with that. This is a great opportunity. It's in fact a golden opportunity to ensure that health do play their visible part, because it, and in terms of addressing that pressure on health services, we think there's more we can do by working together more closely. So there's only benefits going to come from that closer working. At the moment, there tends to be a bit of a gap sometimes between some of the health services where there's a long delay, for example, speech and language. There's quite long delays in accessing speech and language. By working with our school colleagues, we can ensure there's an earlier support offer in place to enable children with early signs of some sort of language delay to get support a little earlier, and in some cases to address that need before it escalates. So it makes sense for both parties. You can really go down the wrong path if we see this as a sort of purely as a battle for resources in terms of us trying to wrangle more money out of health. There is a little bit of that goes on, I'll be honest, but far more effective is for us to be working together in a more coherent and integrated way. And I think this buys us a little more time to really knit together what that looks like and how that works. So you're right to observe that there are no tensions. The health want to work with us, but they are facing similar financial challenges as the local authority, and we have to be really, really collaborative and really also negotiate in a fairly hard and tough way to make sure we're all getting the best out of our mutual spend. And I guess this buys us a little more time to ensure we've got that absolutely worked that to them, worked that to the nth degree before publishing the final strategy. I hope that answers the question fully.
No, it does, and thank you for that. And because the other side of it, of course, is as our health colleagues answer to their masters and their budget masters in particular, there has to be some compulsion on their part. And I'm sure that you're thinking about that. I'm not looking for an answer now, except to say on the gauge of going to be very difficult you have a high confidence that that battle is going to be won. Where would you sit on the gauge?
I guess what I'd say is I'm hoping to avoid it feeling too much like a battle. We are best served, both parties are best served by working together in a really collaborative way. You're right, there's some tough negotiations happen behind closed doors and around certain individual cases. We have, as you might imagine, we have tussles around individual cases where we feel there should be a higher contribution. But in terms of the system as a whole, we are simply trying to make sure we work together in the most coherent way possible. I think things will, in terms of my confidence, I think there's a lot more we can do a lot more effectively. We've got the early signs of that. Health have contributed to our speech and language outreach offer. That will benefit them just as much as it benefits our schools. And I think there's more like that we can do together in a joined up way that will benefit both parties. But we've got a fair way to go before we get more examples like that. And persuading them to invest at a time of such financial hardship, as you will imagine, is sometimes a tough negotiation. But we're well on the way there, and I think it will improve over the next few months, and we'll see the fruits of that over the next few months.
Before I come to you, sorry, did you have another question, Graham?
I was just going to say thank you to Jonathan for actually being candid and open and absolutely apolitical in his answer.
Yeah, and before I come to you, Phil, I'd like to just follow up on Graham's second question. You mentioned at least one initiative, that's you hope is will help to address some of the barriers to accessing health services. You mentioned the speech and language provision and so forth. I'm just wondering, are there any other actions currently underway and any others sort of on your wish list going forward that could help to address some of these barriers and ensure access to appropriate health supports?
Yes, the other probably, there are two particular areas I'd focus on. One of which is around our autism diagnostic pathway, our neurodivergent pathway. I think at the moment the waiting lists there are extraordinarily long, and whilst waiting for that, I think some parents and families tend to really prize the diagnosis. So we're trying to, if you like, ensure that again, early intervention is the answer to that, because if you can see that your child's getting their needs met, then having the prize of a diagnosis is less of a prize. It's not something you necessarily hanker for, because having that label doesn't necessarily improve anything for your child. It's all about what happens in a school on a day-by-day basis in terms of making sure their needs are being appropriately met. But I do think we can, I think the terminology in health is called waiting well. Whilst waiting for the diagnosis, what are we doing about it? We're not just sitting on our hands and waiting for the diagnosis to happen before we do anything, and we can be more joined up in terms of making sure some level of provision and support is available at the earliest opportunity, in conjunction, between school staff on the one hand and supported well by specialists in health. I think the autism would be one area we can probably do a little more and a little better. The other main area, and it's one of the key headlines from the SEND strategy, from all the work we're doing at the moment, is around our mental health challenges. We are seeing such a dramatic shift in the level of mental health needs across our child and young person's population. And CAMS are really overwhelmed, I think, in terms of the demand, and there's a big gap between some of our preventative services and what CAMS can offer. And I think there's more we can do jointly in conjunction with, between health and education and social care, to ensure that there's more support and advice and help available at an earlier stage. It's the eternal story with their mental health services. The earlier you can intervene, the better. And I do think there's more we can do in that arena, and I think we'll begin to see the fruits of some of that in the coming months.
Thank you, Jonathan. Phil.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Jonathan. You sort of touched on it then, but I didn't really gather from your report. With regards to the early intervention, which I agree with you could be really significant in its effects, how much does that include the availability of parental support to support any program that's in place, and to try and reinforce some of the elements at home as well as in school?
Well, as you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the sort of overlay between some of our social care services, our early help offer, for example, and what schools can do. Schools tell us that level of family support and parental support and advice is a very important element of many interventions, and particularly around, I think, mental health, and particularly around autism too. And I don't know, I think it's an area that there's always a quandary in terms of how much education budget you can afford to spend on family support, because that's often, the benefits are felt in school, but there's a very much a grey area in terms of just how much of school investment can be seen to be going into the home to help with things at home. There's clearly payoff and benefit from that, but it's something it's sort of in that marginal area between health, social care and education. All three of those major silos, if you like, or those areas, all will benefit from that family support and intervention. I think we do have to get better at that, and I think we've got a really good early help offer locally. I think we can probably do more to maximise the benefit of that across all areas.
Prue would like to comment, and then we'll come back to you, Phil.
It's in terms of, we need to look at children holistically, so they're not just in school or out of school. They're not just so. One of the things we discussed at the Woking Education Partnership meeting this morning was about how we join up the data and the information that we've got about children, so that we can see across all the services how they interact. So we know, for example, to give you this, if a child's excluded from school, are they a child that's also known to social services? Are they a child that's known to the youth offending service? Are they a child that is already engaged under a child protection? Do they have an EHCP? All those other things that it has been really difficult to join up to now, and we're finally getting our act together. I mean, we're still not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction to get all that data properly shared and then understood, and then we can move towards what I can see as a slightly distant vision, but it's we're getting towards it, of a family hub model. So perhaps not as explicit as that, but a thing where we look at the child in the round with their family, with their school, and all parts of them, so that we're all working, every service that engages with them, working in the same direction, to help that child in every aspect of its life. So this is a really important thing. I mean, we're not there yet, but I can feel it coming, and it's only recently that we've begun to get into a state where our this level of information we have is fit for purpose to actually be used to inform those kind of things. So I'm really quite pleased as we go into 2024 that we're moving in that direction, and that we will be able to join up everything around the child and not see the child just as in a siloed service manner.
Phil, do you have any other observations on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm pleased to hear what you've actually had to say, Prue. I mean, it's quite clear to me that what we mustn't do is, or what I don't want to do, is to make any sort of sweeping assertion that every child that is on that pathway, or perhaps entering that pathway, is a direct result of some sort of non-functioning family or anything. Very often it's because of the alertness and awareness of the family that they find themselves asking for some support locally. It's just, I wanted to have some reassurance that actually it was a little bit more rounded than just relying on the schools, which is a great thing, but goodness only knows there is enough pressure on schools already, resource-wise, just to make sure that there was some joined up working, and if what Prue has said is coming to fruition, and I'm really pleased to hear it.
And it sounds as though it'd be really good for the two of you to continue, and others, to continue that dialogue. So thank you, Phil. Richard.
Jonathan, can I just ask a bit more about the tribunals? Because you said 97%, I can't remember the exact phrasing, 97% found in favour of the person bringing the case to the tribunal.
It's actually gone up recently. I think it's over 97%. It's been 97% for the last few years. It's gone up to, I think it's more like 98% of tribunals find in favour of the complainant. So parents generally, if it gets to tribunal, very often parents, the parental view will win out at tribunal. Okay, so we are better off avoiding getting to that stage in the first place. Is the bottom line? We don't want to get to, we are seeing an increase in our tribunals, but we are doing our utmost to avoid the need to get there, because it's an expensive process. It doesn't, the process itself doesn't benefit anyone. We have to get our needs met earlier and ensure parents are satisfied at an earlier stage.
So I guess I had two questions. One was around what sort of numbers are we talking about, because 98% of what? And then secondly, what do we then do with that? How do we learn from those tribunals about the cause that led to that? And is there learning from the tribunals?
Absolutely. I mean, it's an individual case level. Clearly, there's a response on those individual cases. In terms of learning from them, we've still got relatively low numbers, but we have had a significant increase. I believe, and I'm afraid got the data in front of me, but I think we've got about 30 or maybe as high as 35 in the process now. And it's quite a slow process before they come to tribunal, and that is a fairly substantial uptick from where we were prior to recent changes. So it's certainly something that we are very, very alert to it at the moment. We don't want that number to go any higher. And in terms of learning from it, I mean, yes, we certainly pay very close attention to the findings at tribunal. It's a complex. I think the view nationally is that tribunals demonstrate that it's local authorities that are letting parents down. But there is another nuance to it too, which needs to be accounted for, which is that quite often, I think increasingly, colleagues across other authorities find that tribunals sometimes reach somewhat sometimes perverse decisions, and we feel that even when the authorities made a very, very good case, all the odds are very much against us. So it's a complex they're best avoided from a local authority perspective, best avoided altogether, because it's a very, it's a losing wicket. Even when you've done things as you see it by the book, sometimes the findings still go against you as a local authority. So it's quite there's a growing feeling amongst local authority colleagues that tribunals are sometimes making rather perverse decisions in terms of the resource implications of some of those recommendations, and in terms of sometimes placing parental preference above, even sometimes above the professional views of how needs could be met in a more cost-effective way. Very often tribunals will find in favour of a parental view which might be exponentially more expensive than a moderate, reasonably good offer from the local authority itself. So it's a complex, I suppose what I'm trying to hint at here is it's a very, very complex landscape. And although the 97 or 98% figure suggests every single authority is failing those parents, it's worth bearing in mind that it's not quite as simple as that. And it's one of the major pressure points that many professionals are feeling, that the weighting of parental preference above all other evidence is, some would say, somewhat out of balance, and there was, I think, almost an expectation across the SEND professional community that when the SEND green paper came through, that balance, the balance might be tipped back slightly the other way, but that didn't happen. So it's a daunting prospect in terms of sometimes because as you might imagine, I'm sure I wouldn't say anything too controversial, sometimes parental preference is not necessarily the best outcomes for a child or young person, and we have to try and balance that.
Do you have a follow-up question, Richard? No, just before I come to you, Andrew, I think as Jonathan's explained, this is a very, very complex but also exceedingly important issue. And besides tribunals, of course, there's also mediation as well. And I think you mentioned that there's been significant growth in mediation activity as well. So I'm just wondering whether members feel that there might be any value in pursuing one or both of the following. One would be to have some monitoring, of data of both tribunals and of mediation activity, some time series sort of data, and also, because it is such a complex issue, and it's very difficult for us as lay people to really fully understand, I'm wondering whether even just a single anonymized exemplar, to help us better understand, the process, might possibly be provided, and then in light of that, we might wish to, to take sort of or recommend further investigation. How do members feel about that? Ian?
I prefer the latter because it's anonymised and it's just an example of the process. I think to actually ask for information about tribunals and whatnot, I'm not sure how useful that is without then digging into the details. I suspect it would be too high and not of much use.
Okay. Any other views, Graham, and then Anne?
Yeah, I was going to go along a similar path to Ian, and given the numbers involved, you could have some incidences which skew what the conclusions are, and therefore badly skew what decision processes are made. I think that it's something that certainly I got some involvement in, and I'm absolutely sure Prue does on a day-to-day operational level with the directorate. And we have to place our trust somewhat in the executive member to raise issues when there's seen to be a trend, because I think it would be hard to identify trends using what you're suggesting.
Anne?
Yeah, sorry, actually, I was about to agree with you, Andrew. I think it might be useful to have the stats on, just seeing how many SEND tribunals there are and so on, and the results, and mediation as well. It might show up trends, and presume if it's very high level, it shouldn't be too onerous.
Okay, any other views on this? Well, we clearly have divergent views. What I would like to propose is that we take this away and that the chair and the vice chair talk with the exec member and officers and then perhaps come back with a recommendation, to the committee. Is everybody happy with that?
Chair, might I make a comment?
Of course.
I think I should probably caveat the views I just gave on tribunals. I should very much own as my own views. Not many professionals would. It's dangerous territory for a professional. Because I'm a freelancer, I feel able to be very frank with you. But in terms of, I don't think many officers would have probably said what I was saying about the parental, the balance around parental preference. It's generally the common sense, the consensus that parental preference is rightly given that high status. And I think most of your own officers would probably echo that. My views are my own. I just want to own them so that they go on record as the views of an external observer rather than one of your own officers.
Yes, Prue.
So this is a very difficult area because if you get to a tribunal, effectively you failed anyway. So that's really the point that we would expect, because we're going through a period of change, there will be more parents who are not happy with the decisions that are being made or are worried about the decisions that are being made because and there's no way to whereas there is a suspicion out there that we are ceasing things to save money, that and parents are predisposed to that frame of mind because of all the years they've spent battling for their child in the system. And so any change is not likely to be perceived as positive because the record is that the changes always make life more difficult for them. So we expect the number of challenges to our decisions to go up. And then the bit that we should be worried about is if we start actually reaching lots of tribunal decisions which go against us. And what we actually should be trying to do is, as soon as we start engaging with the parent, we're working with that parent all the way through to avoid the tribunal, not because they're fine against us, but because actually we need to be working with the parents in the interests of the child, and that's how it should work. So we put quite a lot of effort into the mediation part of it, which is what you get before you get to the tribunal itself, and quite a lot of those go almost up to the wire, but we still end up having mediated it away and come to a conclusion where we can agree. So that is our aim as an authority, is to try and do it that way. And I am, as Graham described, keeping an eye on it, as our officers, because of the implications. If I tell you something not to do with this authority, but to do with Oxfordshire, which is next door to us, where they have had a very poor SEND inspection, sadly for them, but they also had at a similar time two, I think it was, but Helen might correct me if I get the numbers wrong, at least two tribunals where the children were home educated, and they got given something like £100,000 a year award from the authority to educate those children at home. So that's £100,000. You can imagine, to educate your child at home. That's what we'd pay for an independent school, and if we get into the state where we're getting those sort of decisions, that will send our budget somewhere through the roof. I mean, so we really don't want to go there. And you can read about those decisions. They're in the press and everything. And I don't know whether those are justified or not, but that seems like a large amount of money to award parents. Either something has gone absolutely terribly wrong, or there's something wrong in the balance, and it's hard to work. But there is something slightly feels a bit odd, but we are trying as an authority to avoid them because they're not actually in the interests of the child, and they create a bad situation where you're in confrontation with the family the whole time, and it doesn't help anybody.
Thank you very much. It's been an enormous number of very helpful points made, about this matter, and they've all been minuted, and that's really useful, because it's there now as a written record and a reminder, going forward to help us understand this process better. It seems to me, though, that this is something that we are going to have to continue to monitor very closely. And what I would like to do is to propose that we go away and we mull this over and come back to the committee, with a proposal about how, how we can achieve that. Thank you for being so patient, Andrew. Okay.
Yeah, my question was sort of linking onto those things. In the presentation, there was the reduction in obviously the number of EHCPs awarded and things like that, which is obviously sort of positive for the safety valve targets. My sort of question is, again, what assurances do we have that is in the best interests of the children that we have, that I think it's not, as Prue was alluding to, just meeting targets by reducing it. And I think linked to that, do we have like kind of Sencos at the school on board with this? Because I guess they see things on the front line, and are they on board with what's happening with the changes to EHCPs and things like that?
Who's best placed to ask? Jonathan, yes.
I mean, I think a quote from one of the Sencos in my first few months here really exemplifies, I think, that we had an email from a Senko who had submitted a request for assessment, and this is not a rare email. I've seen similar ones, but this is a good example, where she said she was well aware that the child's needs were not enormously high, but they were beyond anything the school had worked with previously. She didn't know where to turn for support with those needs, and therefore she had submitted a request for assessment because she didn't really know what else to do. Now, there are services around. I think sometimes navigating them is not as easy as it might be. Sometimes there are some gaps which we are currently investing money to address in terms of that early advice and support for schools. And I think Sencos will work with us and understand that the best thing to do is intervene as quickly as possible to address these needs, to avoid that unnecessary escalation of need, which leads to unnecessary escalation in costs too. So I think you'll find, I really think we've got schools on side. They understand that how we're investing the money at the moment is there to improve the outcomes across the system as a whole. And therefore, I think you said in your comments that we're not, as I think I said last time, we're not aiming to reduce EHC plan numbers overall. We're simply aiming to get the increase down to a more manageable level, because for the past 3 years they have it's been so rapid that no system will cope with that speed of escalation. And there are simply things we can do better with schools, in partnership with schools, to meet those needs at an earlier stage. And I honestly think if you spoke to many of the Sencos, they would say they can see that the services they're beginning to see appear, and better coordination of those services will enable them to do their jobs more effectively. This is really genuinely not about it's not gatekeeping for the sake of cost cutting. It's gatekeeping for the sake of ensuring children have their needs met as early as possible. And I really passionately believe that's what we're doing at the moment. And I understand your concerns, and they're the right questions to ask. But I do think we are in a position where we can invest, improve things, and thereby manage costs more effectively by working more effectively together.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that theme. You, in your presentation, Jonathan, you alluded to the big increase in the number of children with EHCPs in mainstream provision, which is what we've just been talking about. And I'm really pleased, that you're saying that your feeling is that there's been a very positive response from Sencos, to this. My question, though, is there any other feedback from the schools, including, for example, through the Borough Education Partnership? Any concerns about capacity, ability to really, support all of these the children, to the best of their ability? I guess my fear is, the danger of any school feeling that they become overwhelmed. Ming, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I put up my hand not to answer that question, but I can get into answer that question. my thought in response to Councillor's question about whether we can make sure children are being offered the right place, whether our decision is consistently high quality or not. That's a really important question. Because of that, actually, we employ a QA lead quality assurance. We know this is the area we need to strengthen. So we now formally have a QA lead in SCN to make sure whatever decision we made to agree to assess what kind of placements, where in mainstream school, special school, we will have a double check to make sure they are in the right place. So that mechanism has been in place to make it consistency. You here was the outset report about SCN. Let's keep using the word consistent. Consistent. That's what we're working on. We like to give member reassurance that that's something we really have strengthened. Another thing I would like to share with member that, like Lee member just talk about we really play great important in mediation. Jonathan talking about we don't want to end up in tribunals. Nationally, now that's happening as well. That is the mediation regulation now. This approach being enshrined in the statutory regulation from September 2024. All case question tribunal must be to the mediation. That's what we already been doing already. So we will continue to explore what best support, what best communication we have with the parent, what alternative we can find before we reach to that stage. As Jonathan said, the number end up in tribunal is small compared with the 90 cases we deal with, 80 cases we deal with. There are 9 or 13 cases go to tribunal. So when you talk about 97, 98, it's a small number. So that's very important for member to bear in mind. We prevent many cases going into that stage. I can't remember just a question after I put up the hand. What question I get?
The second question was about sort of any potential, for schools to feel that they are overwhelmed, with the growth in the number of children with EHCPs in mainstream.
Yeah, let's another thing. I mean, so far, of course, we do. They have to be open. We do have some school feel they're under pressure. They need to have a particular school have a higher number of EHCP share. For example, let's another school down the road probably have a 2% of the pupil population has HHCP, and my school have a 3.5%. They may have a concern. So we are looking into this, like myself, which those schools with a higher number of EHCP in their school, sometimes for good reason, because parents chose to think this school is really inclusive together. So we make sure we offer the right place. Just now, Jonathan talked about all the early intervention support, AP reform to empower school to support school. The important thing here is how to support school. School feel like empowered. They have a tool to address. I think the good thing is really we have more EHCP children in mainstream school. What I feel is our majority of school feel more confident, particularly in past few months. Really, I think Jonathan reached out to many school leaders, have early intervention workshop. We also talk about how to promote schools confidence. If we do not promote, cannot achieve school confidence in managed EHCP children in managed school, parents wouldn't have a confidence. So we also have less stronger work in place. So to answer the question, overall response from school are positive about this, but there are some challenge, and that's what we are working on to support school. All of the program we are talking about just now, many of them not just support parents, also support school as well.
Prue.
Add one small bit to that. So you'll remember that in Jonathan's presentation, he had the slide which said that the schools had agreed to give us the 0.5% transfer. That money has come to us so that we can spend it on supporting them. And that's a really important thing, because previously that hasn't been quite so nailed down, shall we say? And now it is. So we have got, I think we've appointed somebody, haven't we, to be starting this week, is it? Or starting, I think so, to do the send support outreach to schools, and we're appointing a second person who isn't yet in post, and that's to work with the schools to provide them with that knowledge and support so that they can have the confidence that they know what they're doing with those children. They don't have to reach for an EHCP as the first thing that they do. So it will take time to embed, but we're on the right course. And I do feel, and it came out, I think, a bit at the Borough Education Partnership, that schools are with us, and are pleased with the direction we're going in. I mean, I can't say it's not going to be, it's not certainly not going to be a totally smooth ride, but it feels like we're going forward together, which is a good thing.
That's really good, reassuring, and it's good also to know that the Borough Education Partnership is there, to help feedback on this and other matters. Okay, unless there are any other questions, I'd like to thank Jonathan. You talked about both the safety valve and also the SEND strategy. And just a reminder to members that the SEND strategy will be coming back to us in April, I think, and then going on to the executive in May. So thank you very much, Jonathan, for everything that you do. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Moving on now. Agenda item 62, the Young People's Housing Strategy. And who do we have presenting?
Chair, I thought Sam will be doing most of the work, but I'm just going to say a few words, if I may, of introduction before Sam gets going. That's okay with you?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Sam, who you can see on screen, is the author of the report and will be able to take you through it shortly. But I just wanted to, first of all, commend him for all the work he's put in on this important document, and also commend it to you as a committee for your views. This is part of a more general process that we're trying to engage in as an executive with overview and scrutiny committees. But this could, in theory, come just straight to the executive for us to decide whether it should go out to wider consultation. But we want to test it. We want to involve elected members in questioning and shaping the nature of this strategy, rather than just see it go to the executive to be approved there. So this is an opportunity for you to ask questions and to make suggestions, and we'll be very happy to hear them. I think just a few words of background, if I may. I mean, I think we're all very well aware that there is an affordable housing crisis at the moment. In Wokingham Borough, despite very extensive house building in the last few decades, house prices, contrary to what developers would tell you, about supply and demand, house prices have continued to rise despite very substantial amounts of building. And that's essentially because we are a magnet for large numbers of people, particularly from London. We have been for decades, but that has increased since the pandemic, and working from home. So we're now, because of our good transport links into London, our good quality schools, we still have plenty of beautiful countryside available too. We are an attractive destination for people wanting to move out of London. And that really means that we have a local housing need that constantly is unmet, because we struggle to be able to find solutions through market properties. So this makes affordable housing much more important than perhaps is generally appreciated. In fact, we reckon that of our local housing need, roughly half is now for genuinely affordable housing. And that's really quite an important piece of background to this. Now, obviously, a lack of affordable housing affects all age groups, but I think it is generally accepted that the members of our community that are most disadvantaged by high house and private rent prices are young people. So our young people's housing strategy is one of a series of strategies we're developing under the umbrella strategy of affordable housing and securing more affordable housing, and the young persons affordable housing strategy, or young people's, I keep saying persons, but here we've got people's. Sam and I have a slightly different view on whether it's people's or persons, but you know who we're talking about. The specific categories of young person that we're focusing on in this strategy are those who are the most vulnerable and most in need of help. So care leavers, former young unaccompanied asylum seeking children who have become themselves care leavers, and particular cohort of young people, 16 and 17-year-olds, who we've identified at risk of homelessness. Now, I think in the case of the care leavers, we all have a corporate responsibility because we are the corporate parents of these young people. In the case of all of these young people, whether they're care leavers or not, I think we all would accept we have a moral responsibility to help them. And even if those moral responsibilities don't weigh heavily on your conscience, I hope you would recognise that from the council's point of view, financially helping young people to avoid homelessness is vitally important, because every homeless person becomes an obligation on the council to find accommodation for them. And if there isn't enough affordable housing available, they have to go into emergency accommodation, bed and breakfast accommodation. That's not only tremendously destabilising for them, it's also very, very expensive for the council. So this makes sense morally and financially, I think, to try and put a real focus on helping these particularly vulnerable groups of young people. I've said more than enough, so I'm going to hand over to Sam, the author of this report, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer any questions you've got. Yeah. But I may feel the irresistible urge to chip in if it seems appropriate.
Good evening, Sam, and thanks for joining us tonight. Just before you begin your presentation, I'd just like to remind you that all the members have had an opportunity to read through the whole of the report. A very, very interesting and really well presented report. So I think in your presentation, if you could simply point to some of the highlights or things that you might like to flag up as potential areas for for more of a deep dive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Stephen, for your introduction as well. That was really useful. Just to introduce myself, I'm Sam Watt. I'm the Senior Strategy Officer in the Strategic Housing team. Stephen's done a really good job of introducing the strategy and why we've brought it here in terms of looking for your input before we take it to executive in a couple of months' time. So I was thinking I would just go through, as you've all read the report in detail as well, just how the strategy has come about and sort of just a bit more detail on why we've brought it forwards. So it's Young People's Housing Strategy. We did have one previously that ran until 2019 for 5 years from 2014, which did produce some really good outcomes. But obviously in the years since, there's been a lot of change in terms of context. I won't list all the different national and international events that have gone on, but obviously they've had an impact on affordable housing in Wokingham and in turn young people's housing in Wokingham as well. Just to sort of stress some of the particular challenges that we're facing in Wokingham, and obviously is national as well, including high rent arrears, in terms of care leavers and the difficulties we have in terms of tenancy sustainment to get those care leavers and young people that we have had a corporate parenting responsibility to, that we still have, and maintaining those rent level, both for the benefit of the council from a financial point of view, but obviously from the point of view of the care leaver as well and the young person, which leads into the lack of options that there are in the private rented sector. Wokingham Borough doesn't have a massive private rented sector, especially for young people in terms of shared houses. There's very few houses multiple occupation, HMOs. And then in the context of increasing numbers of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and particularly those that then become care leavers as well, and the relative support needs that we then have to fulfil from that point of view, and obviously our responsibility as a corporate parent as well. So like Stephen mentioned, there's 3 key groups that we're looking to support through introducing 4 strategic priorities over the next 4 years to run from 2024 to 2028. And it lines up with the affordable housing strategy that has been mentioned as well, as a framework document, an umbrella document that this will support and sit alongside other strategies as well, including the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, which is also due to be refreshed this year. So we're looking at it in that kind of context, and obviously bringing it here for your input as well, and looking at the different things that we can look at as well. So we've just had the internal consultation with officers across the board from Children's Services, from my directorate in Place and Growth as well, and also from Commercial Property as well, to see where we can look at this strategy and really interrogate it and make it the best it can be. Partnership working, co-production is at the centre of the whole strategy. And then just quickly to outline those strategic priorities, they're all in the report, so I won't go into too much detail, but just looking at expanding housing options, what we can increase the quantity and quality of the options that we've got for bespoke, to fit the characteristics of each young person individually. Second strategic priority is about developing clear housing pathways, aligning to our corporate parenting duty and making sure that we can provide better outcomes for those young people that have been listed. The third priority is on supporting tenancy sustainment. So I mentioned rent arrears earlier, and the difference that there is between care leavers amongst our housing revenue account and other general needs residents, and how we can try and bridge that gap and provide more support for those care leavers to mitigate that impact, as well as providing a more fulfilling housing pathway. And then the fourth strategic priority is on reducing homelessness and rough sleeping. We've already been successful, as is in the strategy, on a couple of grant initiatives with government. So looking to see if we can expand those, evaluate them and interrogate them moving forwards, and potentially exploring any early intervention as well, as obviously that's a key way to improve outcomes for our young people. I'll just touch on timelines quickly and then open up for questions. So the internal consultation is just nearing completion. We're looking to go to public consultation over the next couple of weeks, which should be due to finish in mid-February. The strategy that was attached as an appendix to my report will have been slightly altered from the internal consultation. And it's worth mentioning as well that we're exploring accessibility options, so to produce an easy read version of the strategy to make it more accessible for those people. And as part of the public consultation, we're looking to explore how we can co-produce strategy in more ways with young people. So, for example, next week I'm taking it to the Youth Council for another review there. I think that was everything that I wanted to say, just to introduce the report. So I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Sam. And so our purpose now, our role now, is to provide oversight and input into this strategy, which I believe is going to the executive on the 14th of March. So who would like to begin with questions? So let me just get names down first. Anyone else? Okay, Andrew. Good. Okay. So Anne, would you like to begin?
Sam, sorry, on priority 4, page 46, it says that they will be providing information to families to try to avoid young people becoming homeless. I was just wondering what, how would that work? What sort of information would it be? So I've got
it's a really good question. Thank you very much. So the reason that we've put that in there is because not being able to access the family home for whatever reason, or being able to stay with friends in the same circumstances, is one of the main causes for homelessness amongst young people nationally. So that's why we've looked to target that. And as part of a consultant's report that we commissioned a couple of years ago, one of the threads that came out of that was to increase the early intervention that we could potentially do in terms of signposting families to the various different support that is on offer not just from the council ourselves, but also from our third sector partner agencies. So potentially increasing the accessibility of that information and trying to see if we can, there's another action on there actually about looking at identifying individuals at an earlier age that potentially might be at risk of homelessness. So can we get to those families earlier on and look at the support we can give them at an earlier stage, and then hopefully reduce the chances of them becoming homeless later down the line.
Oh, I see. So it's providing information of ways that they could get support that would help to keep the young person in the family home, I presume.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So any sort of remediation of relationships and any other support that we could offer in that respect.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. And then the other one, it's on page 54, action 4.3. How can you monitor a young person's needs who's in private accommodation? Because I was just thinking, if the young person's in one of the housing provided by the council, and I suppose if the young person's getting into some sort of difficulty, the council was likely to know about it. But if they're in the private sector, it might be more difficult to sort of have a handle on it. Do you know how you might go about it?
It's a really good point, and potentially what should have been made clear is that those people that we're looking to target as part of that action are likely to have come through our rent guarantee scheme, which is not just for young people, but for everybody who might be at risk of homelessness, and as a move on option. So they won't necessarily, they'll be identified as they can live independently or with some floating level of support in the private rented sector. So we're likely to be aware of them because we'll have funded their deposit and funded potentially a few months worth of rent, and we'll still be keeping tabs on them in that respect, but just making sure that we can support those people to maintain those tenancies in the private rented sector, working with landlords as part of a forum of cooperative landlords in the borough, and working in that point of view. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. That's really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just on that last point, just for clarity, the care leavers, of course, will all have PAs, won't they?
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And following up on the so personal assistance, but following up on the first question that you asked, Anne, and Sam's response about the role of signposting. You specifically mentioned, Sam, partnership, working, and I think that's something else which I think is really important for us to pursue. And I'd like, just before we come to you, Andrew, I'd just like to make the comment. I note that that in this document you say that the council aims to sign up to the Care Leaver Covenant, and an important part of that covenant involves partnership working. And I hope, that that we continue to explore vigorously, all possible opportunities, for involving as many and diverse local voluntary sector organisations, local businesses, and so forth in supporting that covenant. Yeah. So I think that's also a really important part of this process, and it goes back to that first question, that you raised, Anne. So thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the report. It's very detailed. My first one is on page 40. It was just a query really about the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, where it's talking about them being placed outside of the borough. Is it the responsibility of us to, for all the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who are under our care, even if they are placed outside the borough, for example, in more expensive places, for example, London? And how does that, is that one of the, is that a financial pressure if lots of them are placed in or currently living in more expensive areas?
I'll try and answer the question, but I might need some support from other officers or members potentially as well. So that we do have responsibility to those that we place out of borough as well, and in terms of placing them in, we have to do a kind of a profile, I suppose, is one way of putting it, about where those people might be best placed, and often it's in London or other areas of major conurbation, because that's where a lot of people from their culture will live, people from their country will live, and they'll have a more of a community base there. That there is a point in the strategy about potentially or not potentially, but trying to explore more local based accommodation, so that we can try and keep it in Wokingham Borough, so that we don't have unaccompanied asylum seeking children that are under our corporate parenting duty in areas that are further afield, because obviously that has a support implication that you're right, is then more expensive to fulfill. If they're in our area, then that makes it easier to fulfill from a support point of view, and much more likely less expensive as well. But the point of that is that there isn't necessarily in Wokingham those large community bases that potentially are in Reading, in Slough, and in London. And we do have unaccompanied asylum seeking children further afield than that, I believe. So it's potentially looking at how we can increase the local provision in order to keep the costs down, both from a support point of view, but also if we have more control of the accommodation, then that has positives in terms of the quality of it as well, in terms of our oversight of it.
Adam, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Sam's covered that very well. The bit we're looking at is developing more in-borough placements, because where our children start their journey of care tends to be where they live as a care leaver or they progress to their independence. So by having more in-borough placements for our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children will therefore enable us to look at housing those more locally as they grow and become care leavers.
And Prue?
Just want to add an observation, because I went to the National Conference for Adults and Children in November, and there were some authorities presenting on this kind of issue. What was very interesting was that one of them said that they had assumed that the children that they acquired through the National Transfer Scheme from unaccompanied asylum seeking children, that they wouldn't feel, that they would place them in these conurbation things where they had their local society thing, because they thought that would be best for them. And actually the feedback they got from the children themselves was that, well, we belong to you now, and therefore we want to be part of your community. And therefore they've started trying to find places for them closer to home. So it works in both ways. And I thought that was very interesting, because with the best of intentions, we've been looking at somewhere else, but actually they want to belong to us. So that was a very interesting insight.
Stephen, and then I'd like to come back to Prue's point.
We've already heard, I think, in the discussion so far, two rather well-known themes emerging. One of them is the importance of early intervention, and the other is the more in-borough provision you can have, the better.
Yes, and of course the in-borough provision, applies to all, of our care leavers as well. But there has been there is currently a disproportionate number of US care leavers, who are housed out of borough. I'm fascinated by what you just said, Prue, because albeit I've only spoken to a handful of US care leavers, but I have, on a number of different occasions, and I am firmly convinced, that that there are opportunities, for them, and indeed a desire, to be housed, often housed locally. So I'm assuming that the conversations with the US care leavers, on that matter, are taking place, because I think there is an opportunity here, and I think it would be beneficial in terms of welfare, but also, of course, in helping to keep a cap on costs. Andrew.
Sorry, yes, thank you. That was really useful. I did have one other thing about something slightly different. On page 43, another question. So the end of the second paragraph. In addition, we'll explore the creation of setting up home budgets to ensure that no care leavers move into the tenancy without essential white goods. I wonder, I might be wrong with this, but was this the sort of budget which was discussed at corporate parenting board this last time, in terms of the and my question is, it says exploring the creation of a setting up home budget, I was under the impression that already exists, but is it sort of being used in a different way? And I guess my question is, how is that budget given to care leavers? Is it given all in one go, or do they have to apply for it for certain items and things like that?
So as part of the internal consultation, that point was picked up, and I'm not sure what was referenced at the corporate parenting board, but was it potentially the Make a House a Home project, which is sitting under the Tackling Poverty Action Plan? And if it was, then what we're now looking at doing is, instead of this setting up a home budget, we're looking to see how and if it's possible to incorporate this action into the Make a House a Home project, which is with our third sector partner agencies, as part of the Tackling Poverty Action Plan and that group there. And just a brief summary, I suppose, is that's getting all of our third party agencies across the borough who already provide lots of furniture for care leavers and also for others that are at risk of homelessness, and looking to get a kind of more holistic approach to that. And seeing if we can find any sort of economies of scale from that point of view. But that is only just finished its first year, I believe. So it's something to explore over the next couple of years. Obviously, within the council's financial context, it's something we can't commit to at this point in terms of setting up home budgets.
Adam?
Just the point that the corporate parenting board discussion was in relation to the setting up home allowance, or shuha as it's described, and that's part of care leaver duties, and obviously that's a set amount, and it depends what condition the property is when it's being moved into, whether it has flooring and so forth. And part of the what we try and do is get the level or the quality of the accommodation when young people move into it at a certain level. So therefore, the setting up home allowance can be used for furnishings rather than the floorings or decorating and so forth. So any additional contribution to that is always supportive to our care leavers.
Anything further, Andrew?
Yeah, I guess my question is that budget, because I think it was discussed there as being raised to £3,000 from the 2,000 that it was before. Is that given as a kind of when a care leaver moves in, is that given as a flat fee, as a sort of, or do they have to apply for what they need?
It's an up to allowance, and it tends to be worked with their personal advisor in terms of how that is spent and used, in terms of whether that's essential white goods or sofas or furnishings and carpets and so forth. So it's done on a young person or a care leaver, dependent on what their needs are in terms of that accommodation that they're moving into.
Okay, thank you.
Roy, did you have anything to add?
Just simply, it's a kind of case by case basis, because some care leavers would be capable of spending money and others will need assistance to make sure they don't spend it on things that perhaps were not ideal. So, but you're right, we did discuss it at corporate parenting board, and I'm sure that it will come up again. But it's part of the care leaver. What's the word? Offer. Duties. That's the word. Duties. That's the word I was looking at. Yeah, so it's a thing that this is what Sam's describing as something a bit more, I think, and it's the kind of thing that we do for people who move into temporary accommodation and that kind of thing, that we make sure that they've got a fridge and a freezer and a washing machine and a cooker and stuff like that in the accommodation, so that they can go. So it's more related to that. So it's more from a housing point of view, but I'm sure that Sam has picked up that point and will go away and incorporate whatever extra detail needs to go into the strategy, if any does.
Thank you. Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Stephen, thanks for being brave enough and coming and asking for comment, because you're about to get it. The document here is called the Young Persons Housing Strategy. That's a lot of people in the borough. Most of the conversation has gone on about the vulnerable. And quite rightly, all of the points have been raised and would support what's been said. However, we've got roughly 26,000 school children. A vast majority of them are like mine, where I brought them into the borough. They were schooled in the borough. They went to university outside of the borough. And I've said, you're not moving back home, and they can't afford to move back. We have a number of children now that we want to encourage to continue their education with apprenticeships and so forth. And they need to have somewhere to live too. And then we've got right on our doorstep, I think Reading University has got more footprint in Woking than it has in Reading. I think that's true, isn't it? So seeing that we're talking about strategy here, could this or should this be linked, or is it a separate thing? I'm just ceding it to you for something to think about in what I would call attracting young talent and getting that into the borough, because most of us have earned some good money somewhere else, whether that's by income or capital acquisition or a combination of both, which has enabled us to afford to move here and live very comfortably. But we're not breeding that environment for other people, and least of all, our own children.
Shall I perhaps want to respond to that one, Sam, although do chip in if you think I've missed something important. I think the pattern you've described, Graham, of young people being educated in the borough but leaving the borough to go to university elsewhere, you know, that was the norm. Universities are now taking in a much broader catchment of students than they were 20 years ago. They are also now experiencing, because of the cost pressures on students, a tendency for young people to want to go to a proximate university, a university nearby. The universities themselves are facing pressure to recruit more local students. One of the reasons why we're working on a strategic partnership with the universities to try and gain some of the educational advantages for our young people of having a world-class university, as you quite rightly said, largely in the borough, partially in the borough at least, but I say largely in the borough. So I'm mindful that, you know, patterns are changing somewhat. We also have to remember that, as you alluded to, there are lots of young people who won't go to university for whatever reason. And the apprenticeship route is one that they may well pursue, and that may well involve employment locally and therefore seeking housing locally. Your point about attracting young talent is a really interesting one. And actually coming out of the discussions with the university has been some really interesting work on how we're going to help with particularly the young labour force for some of the new arrivals on the science park. And here I'm thinking particularly of the British Museum, the Natural History Museum. They all have early career young researchers, probably living in rented accommodation in London, who it's going to be really quite difficult for them to commute. So they're going to want to move here. They won't be able to afford property here, not a chance. So how are we going to help them? Currently, our affordable housing strategy, affordable housing eligibility criteria place a great deal of importance on local connection. We, I think, are really now exploring how we might be able to make an exception for key worker housing so that it's possible to recruit key workers from outside the area who are needed where there are crucial employment opportunities that require to be filled. So I'm mindful of what you're saying. I don't think this is obviously going to feature in this strategy, because this strategy is focusing on those particularly vulnerable groups we've been talking about. It is important to say that the forward, which you can't see because it's not in this report, but it is itself a jointly authored forward, although my name goes under it. Sam has written a good deal of it. And Sam, quite rightly, in the forward that looks though it comes from me, says there are obviously lots of other young people who this particular strategy does not focus on, but we are mindful of their needs. And we're going to try and address that through the broader affordable housing strategy. This, along with an old person's affordable housing strategy and a new homelessness strategy, will sit under that big affordable housing strategy. View that as the kind of the big strategy, and these are daughter strategies that sit under it, essentially. So we are mindful of the points you're making, and those should find we're working on ways of addressing that through the affordable housing strategy.
Just before I come to Chris, I'd like to pick up on, again, another really important point that you've made, Graham. I think Stephen has given a very clear sort of explanation, of how this is a part of or sits under the wider affordable housing strategy, as outlined in this document. But I think we've glossed over an important point that Graham made, and that is the title, of this strategy actually an appropriate descriptor, because we're talking about a very specific, or three very specific cohorts of young people, and that's not captured, in the current title. I think that's one of the points that you were making, Graham. I don't know, what the alternative title might be, but I think it is important, if it's possible, to come up with, something that is going to be very clear.
Sam and I had this discussion at various stages of the formulation of this strategy, and I've raised the very point that you're raising and Graham's raised. Well, it's actually not truly an affordable young person's affordable housing strategy, because it's focusing on particular categories of young person. But I don't think for the life of us we could find a way that was sufficiently crisp and clear to capture what we're trying to do with these three particular groups. Maybe that's something we can continue to try and do if you feel that's necessary.
Graham?
I think I heard earlier that you're proposing to take this to the Youth Council, because I think when they see it, if you hear the "what about me" because of the title issue that Andrew's just explained very eloquently, then you better scratch your brains again.
Well, that's a very good point, although it is worth saying the Youth Council were the first group we took it to, if I remember rightly. They've had one look already, so this would be a second look for them.
Okay, Chris.
I'm going to bring a slightly different angle to this as an ex-serviceman. When I look at page 57 on the equality impact assessment and the general groupings that have been declared earlier on in here. In my time, and I think it still counts, the only place that a serviceman on leaving service is allowed to go and apply for housing is where they were attested. So again, it'll be whether or not there are any county-wide assessment centres where people would have been attested and joined the services. The loss of Arborfield means that there's this massive difference now, that there isn't a massive group of people that could suddenly hit the local area and influence this decision. But if we take the consideration that somebody, a young joiner to the services, it's very much a pyramidal structure. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to be let out the door at an early age. So you can get quite a lot of people under the age of 25 who've done 6 years service in some very strenuous environments, suddenly find themselves out on the street with no worldly experience of normal life. They've had it, they've come from school, they've gone into the military service, and they've been looked after effectively. And suddenly they're out in the wide world. They've lost their job, they've lost their future, they've lost the group that they worked with and lived with that would be their support group, and they find themselves in a community. And from my own experience, when you are shown the front door, there is no back door. You're shown the back door. There's no front door you can go into. It was very much a case of you were left out on your own. You had to work it out for yourself. There was very little help or assessment, even though we would turn around and say that you had a resettlement scheme in certain services like this. there was no real help. There was nothing to say, well, this is where you can go and sign on for, or go and apply for housing, etc. So at an earlier ages, the young under 24s, it's unlikely they're going to have a young family. That doesn't mean to say they're not going to. And suddenly they are completely devoid of any support. Now, the military covenant is supposed to put support processes in place, but more and more, the young servicemen are finding that it's charitable institutions that are going to help them. They're not going to find a lot of help from the social structure that others in the community would find that they're used to working with. I don't see that there is a need for a specific grouping to be put in here, but I don't see any mention of them as such. They just fall into this group of they're under 25 and what is their experience? And a lot of them have been through traumatic experiences in the recent years. So it's I'm not deriding anything that's in here. The structure's right, but there is that group that we ignore that end up being the homeless that we see on the streets, and we see the Help for Heroes and all the rest of it. The publicity is there, and it's in our face. So I was just wondering whether
those are really good points, Chris. I was wondering what you meant by tested. You mean recruited, the point of recruitment. So that effectively becomes the place where they can apply for help, the place they were recruited.
That is legally the only place where they can go on a housing list.
Right. Okay.
So it's whether or not, I don't know whether that's changed, but that's how it used to be.
But I think you're absolutely right that there's a particular challenge for this group of young men. Well, I guess there are some women who will come in the same category, but I guess it's largely men. I think I've read something that tells me this is correct, that they're disproportionately highly represented amongst homelessness groups. So these are a particular group of people that we might need to really keep an eye open for. Our strategy is currently articulated is focusing on 16 to 17-year-olds at risk of homelessness, and obviously that would exclude these army leavers, who, as you quite rightly and very eloquently said, they're not just lost their job, they've lost effectively their replacement family, because the army is like a family to them. It might even be true of the Air Force and the Navy, but it's the army I know most about. So they've lost a lot of that kind of social framework and support network, and they have become fairly institutionalized. So they are now cut loose without any support. So I think it is something that we should reflect on and see whether there's anything we can do. Whether it should be done through this strategy, I suspect not. I suspect the general affordable housing strategy is, again, the place where we should be addressing this. And we might want to see whether there are any ways in which we could make explicit reference to the plight of these young ex-service men and women.
Thank you. And I can actually see a potential recommendation there going to the executive on that issue. So thank you very much for raising that. Ian.
Thank you. If I can just cover something on that last part as well. Place of attestation is where you stick up your hand, put your face on the Bible and say, I swear by, etc., etc. That's at your local careers office, where you then go to train, and what becomes your home it's typically in the army, is where your regiment or your corps is, and you will go out from there around the world and keep coming back to that same place, and that's where you build up your relationships, and that's really where you want to stay. You don't want to go back to some other place where you were at 17 or 18 when you stuck your hand up. It's a completely different place. So sticking by, if that's the law, somebody needs to tackle that, because that's actually wrong. It's far too limiting. Right, what I want to cover very quickly, probably one for Prue more than anybody else. Hague, and that's not me asking for a wee dram. Housing Advisory and Implementation Group. has it actually already been set up? I didn't see it at the beginning of the year.
Stephen's in charge of that. And
I
sit
chair
on
it, and I know it exists because we meet and we have members from other political groups sitting on it, and it is a genuine cross-party group that works very effectively. And it has reviewed this strategy.
And I sit on it and represent young people's interests on it.
And since we're talking about sort of groups, I'm just wondering if we could have a very, very brief explanation, of the structure and the purpose of the Young Persons Housing Panel, which I believe was created in 2022. I note that in the report that it says that one of its functions will be to review the action plan. But what is this panel? Okay, who does it comprise? Okay, and what's its purpose?
Do you want to go for this one? It's very handy having you to pass the difficult questions to.
Yeah, so the Young People's Housing Panel was set up off of the visit from one of our consultants that we had a couple of years ago, and also working with government as well at the time to sort of review our processes. And it was to really push to get co-production and sort of closer relationships between our housing services, our operational housing services, and our children's services as well, to make sure that those referrals are being made with all of the information and at the right points to get the best outcomes and help map those pathways out. So in terms of who sits on them, I don't personally, but I have colleagues in operational housing that do. They fed into the strategy, and likewise the strategy has been co-produced with people from children's services that also sit on the panel. We thought that was the right forum to have the Young People's Housing Strategy, or what else it is to be named, and the action plan to be reviewed at that point, because those are the people that have the best relationships with the young people that are outlined in this strategy, and will hopefully have the best insight in terms of holding the strategy to account, because we're really keen for it to be a live document that is reviewed annually, as the action plan is reviewed annually, and really makes an impact over those 4 years. So hopefully that answers the question on what the Young People's Housing Panel is, and how we intend to use the strategy and the group together.
And so this panel is really important in helping to get and keep the young people in housing, so to support them, to help them get the right decisions, the right accommodation for them, and then support them so they don't become homeless. And I am sure, and an officer will correct me if I get this wrong, that we recently had a meeting at which it was announced that in the past, I think it must have been till April 2023, so probably years, but it might be a different period, that 71% of they'd reduced the number of young people in this category going into temporary or emergency accommodation by 71% over that period, which is an enormous difference. So actually shows that what services working together can actually make a difference for those young people and keep them in their accommodation, and have somewhere to live, which is a really good outcome. So it's a really good panel, and I wouldn't want it to be undersold.
And it sounds as though the panel sort of looks at each individual sort of on a individual basis. Okay, Adam?
Just going to support what Prue was saying. It's about that mapping those transitions so that our care leavers move from placements into their own accommodation in a planned way. We know who's coming, who's going to be reaching that age or that level of independence, ready to progress through. And it's about how we work with housing around identifying those young people and their support needs as they move from a placement that offers support into a placement that offers much more independence without using temporary accommodation where possible and as part of that journey.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, the minutes will have recorded a lot of observations, which we will sort of synthesize and ensure that they are conveyed to the executive. There are two kind of mini recommendations, I think, though, that I think it would be useful to note. The first is a request for the executive to reflect on the situation of some of our vulnerable ex-servicemen and women living in the borough and their needs, including housing needs, and how these might be supported. So some form of recommendation, along those lines. Have I summarised that accurately? Yep, thank you. Yeah.
Can I just clarify, in your recommendation, you're just going to ask the executive to consider ways in which this could be addressed rather than try to get this incorporated in this policy or this strategy? Sorry.
Exactly. Okay.
Good.
I don't think that is realistic. Okay. And I don't think that was the intention of members. Graham?
Yeah, I was going to agree that this is a strategy document covering 5 years, so it ain't going to attract everything all at once.
Good.
But we can note this for the affordable housing strategy more generally.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, Lucienne, if we could link it to the overarching affordable housing strategy. Yeah, thank you. And then the second recommendation, and I apologise for this, but it is, to ask for further reflection on the title, of this strategy, because, if it is possible, to get something that is clearer. I appreciate, the efforts that have already been made, to do this, then, that would have to be a good thing.
So would something like vulnerable young persons? Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. We do.
Okay, any further questions or comments on this agenda item? If not, thank you so much, Sam, for being with us tonight and for all the work, that you and everybody that you're working with, has done on this really important strategy. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you also, Stephen, for attending tonight. Likewise, we really do appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, moving on, agenda item 63, the KPIs. Just before we deal with this, this issue, I think that my reading of the document seems to be that there may be a little bit of confusion about the time period being covered. I believe that the KPIs refer to Q2, which is up to September 2023, but on page 67 there's a reference to the period April to June, only April to June 2023. So if we could just clarify that. And I see Sededra, you're going to be presenting tonight. Just a reminder, Sededra, usual reminder, and I do apologise for this, we have all had the opportunity to read through these carefully. Really, unless there are any particular points that you wish to highlight, I think the bulk of this item is likely to be sort of questioning and answers. But over to you, Sededra.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to apologise. This report was in a draft state when it has been published or shared. So I would like to share the report because there has been missing data on dashboard item 8, which we have now covered. So if you allow me to share my screen, then. I can't hear you, Chair, if you are saying anything.
Oh, I apologise. Okay. Yeah, what we'll try to do, if it's okay with you, is we'll go through each dashboard in turn.
Yes.
And when we come to dashboard 8, we can look at that updated data. Is that okay? Everybody happy with that? Yeah. Okay, so dashboard item 1. Okay, Ian.
Okay, this applies generally. Actually, on the far right-hand side of all the tables, there's something called direction of travel. on these sorts of indicators, we normally use a RAG system, red, amber, green, and we also put an arrow system on it as well. We haven't got the RAG bit, but we do have the arrow system, and it's described as direction of travel. I think that's causing some confusion, certainly in my mind. The normal thing is where something is improving, we have the arrow going up, and where it's getting worse, we have the arrow going down. But depending on what the wording is of the individual item, it goes up or goes down. So there is actually no consistency across the piece, and it is very confusing.
Just before you respond, this is a perennial issue, and it's one which has been revisited many, many times. It is complicated, and the devil is in the details. Sometimes it's almost counterintuitive. You know, there could be a figure that is, in very simplistic terms, is going down, okay, and yet, okay, the direction of travel is pointing upwards, okay. It depends on the specific item, okay. So if you'd like to give a specific, is this referred to dashboard 1?
No, not necessarily. Actually, I couldn't tell you that. I can tell you the pages.
Okay, well, let's deal with this. Okay, now.
Okay, page 72.
Okay.
I'll give you a chance to have a look at that. Page 72.
Yeah.
The number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children has gone up, therefore has got worse, and therefore surely the arrow should go down, but it's gone up. The reason why we want to do it this way is for consistency across the piece, so that you can quickly look down it and say, these are all the ones with the arrows going down. These are the ones that members need to concentrate on.
I can't hear you, Chair, if you're talking.
Sorry. Who'd like to respond to the well, let's deal with that specific example first, okay? This is on page 72.
Sorry,
yeah.
Just respond. I think that's an interesting example, because I wouldn't say care leavers increasing is a negative or a positive. I would say it's reflecting of what the trend is. And I would probably be cautious about using language about negative of that number increasing, because we have a number under the National Transfer Scheme. And I would say that's just giving an indicator of that number has increased.
Okay, I'll give you a different one. Also on page 72. Number of children with more than one social worker in 12 months, which is recognised in the text as not being good. Surely there it has increased, and therefore the problem has increased, and therefore the arrow should go down.
I don't think the arrow is a reflective of a negative or positive in terms of what we view it. It's a reflection of what the number's gone up. So more children have experienced a change in social worker.
In that case, could I please ask that we do what we used to do, which is we use the RAG system.
But again, on some of those, I don't know whether, for example, on the unaccompanied, it's a negative or a positive. It would be a neutral position.
Okay,
I think we need two things, because you need to, people can see whether it's gone up or down because you've got the previous things in it, but we actually need to know whether it's getting better or worse. So rather than arrows, I would say it should say better or worse. And if we can't do the colour printing, but also there are some where it actually is neither better nor worse, it's just a thing. And I would just leave them out. It's not, you're not measuring yourself against it. So I think that might be, I don't know whether Helen's got a view on that. I can understand why it's like this, but I also think it's not helpful to people who are just looking at it, because it's ambiguous, and anything that's ambiguous is not going to be helpful. So I don't know whether better and worse. Let's see what Helen thinks.
Helen?
Thank you. I mean, I think what we all want is a report that is meaningful and helpful. So I think we're all trying to get to that. I don't know whether there's a comparator type of report that another scrutiny panel receives that it would be useful for us to look at for clarity. So Deshna, I don't know if you were going to come in with a view about, because you've obviously worked in Wokingham for a number of years and have presented these reports for a
Yes.
while. So what's your perspective on this, Chair, if you don't mind me asking? Yeah.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Helen. So what I was going to propose is that either we do better or worse, but we keep the arrow as a direction of travel, which is consistent, whether the numbers are going up or numbers are going down. But there can be either a column saying it's better or worse, or the arrows can be, rag rated, like it can be green or amber or red. But if you can't print out the color printer, it's better we have another column saying better or worse. I think that is a simple solution to this arrows system. Yes.
And yeah, and nothing if it doesn't actually matter.
Yes. Yes.
So would members, thank you for raising this, Ian. So would members be in favour of asking Sudeshna if perhaps for the next report, if we could follow that approach, okay, just to see, see if it helps to improve the situation, our understanding. Yeah, Andrew?
Yes, I broadly agree. I was just wondering, I haven't had a chance to look through all of these. Is it fairly clear which ones are fairly neutral and which ones it is clear which ones are positive? I'm just wondering if there's any contested statistics on there.
Actually, it is if you know, but it's not obvious from the reports. So actually, the number of EHCPs, it matters in some contexts in that we're measuring against a safety valve thing, but actually it's just a thing.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of thinking about.
Yes.
In terms of some of those statistics, you can look at is positive or negative in different
ways.
But
so sure, we've got Mark volunteering to give a view. He's probably quite a sensible person.
Thank you, Councillor. What I would say is all of these indicators matter. And I can, as somebody who's steeped in this day in, day out, I understand what Sudeshna's presented in terms of the numbers are going out. I think the challenge, and it's a fair challenge, is members are looking for an indication of performance in terms of whether performance is better or worse. And I think we can very, very simply address that for the next meeting. So I'll pick it up with Sudeshna outside of here. We'll look at whether it's a RAG rating or whether it's a very clear descriptor about performance is better, performance is worse, because all of these indicators are really critical for Wokingham and the experience of our children. So the challenge is a fair one, it's a good one, we've heard that, and we'll make sure we have this nailed down and bottomed out before we next meet.
Thanks for that, Mark. I think you've hit the nail on the head. I'm also just looking through some of these tables again, with in a different light. I'm wondering whether over time the use of these arrows may have changed, because I think in the past they were more focused on the direction of travel in terms of performance as opposed to raw numbers, as it were. And I can understand perhaps why, if that has happened, why that might have happened. So I think it's really opportune to, to take a careful look at this again. Prue.
When I say they don't matter, I don't mean they don't matter.
No, of course not. No.
I'm sure
I wasn't suggesting that.
But there are things you can't do anything about. So among the things is the number of referrals to early. A number of people that come in through the front door for early help, things like that. You can't do anything about that. It's a thing, and so it's not really better or worse. It's up, which is a different thing. So I'm sure that between you can come up with something that makes it clearer for members that what's going on.
Sorry, just if I may, Chair, just to come in, you're absolutely right, Councillor, and I wasn't suggesting you were saying that none of these indicators or these indicators didn't matter. I think you make a really important point. There is no correct number of early help or contacts to the front door referrals. But members need to be cited on the demand at the front door, so we know whether the demand and the pressure's increasing, and it may be absolutely right and legitimate. And if it comes down, that may be good too, because we can give a description about other work going on across the borough, which is having an impact to prevent the escalation of need. So it is a really complex picture. And it's very difficult in a report like Sudeshna's produced to get all of the nuances. So we'll have a think about how we can give some description to the performance and the indicators and the direction of travel, so that then you can give it a really good interrogation about what that means for the borough and the children in Wokingham.
Good, thank you very much. So thank you, Ian, for raising this. Chris?
Thanks. Just another comment on this just get the right dashboard. Dashboard 6 on page 73 will be the example I'm using. Is some of the dashboards you put figures, totals that you're working your percentages from. And it's a little bit awkward sometimes when I'm looking to look at these and see percentages. They give a much higher impression of an error or change. And as it's over a particular period, I can't tell whether or not, for argument's sake, there has been an increase in the number of care leavers that you're accounting for in those periods, or whether it's short-fallen. Whereas in other items like 7A, you've got totals at the top, so we can appreciate the percentages. Percentages hurt because it always makes the figure look massive. And it's just a look of it. I know that the data is in there because if I read further down inside the document, I can see it. But those impressions of the dashboards, if you are going to want to use percentages and you're rating it on a particular figure, then it would be helpful if the figures at the top of the totals are at the top, so we can understand what the changes are. Because we see something like 33%, 100%, 33% changes, 40%. When we look at the figures of children missing for care, for argument's sake, on 7A, the totals are there. It gives weight to the percentage. It makes it's meaningful. Without the numbers, unfortunately, the percentages tables on their own become a little bit less impressive. They don't not impressive, but they don't impress the changes on me.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, just come in again, and Sudeshna may want to comment. The numbers are there. It takes a little bit of mental arithmetic to work it out. So, for example, in quarter 2, 78% of 18 children home interviews were accepted. In quarter 1, it was 60% of 22. So it isn't an easy kind of immediate digest. So there is a little bit of maths that needs to be done, and again we can think about how we might present that more easily for members of this committee. The important thing for me is what we need to see is the percentage of return interviews accepted and undertaken continue to increase, and that's what will be challenged on by Ofsted when they come. And so Ofsted will look at the percentages, and that's why Sudeshna presents it in the way she does. But if we'll give a little bit of thought to whether there's an easier way for a committee such as this, which isn't living and breathing this information every day, to understand the information. Sudeshna, please, if you want to say anything on the back of what I've said, then do.
I think I was going to echo the same message as well, and also just to let you know, Chair, that this dashboard has been looked at like 3 or 4 years ago, and all these new KPIs and this percentage had been agreed at that time. But again, if now is the time, we need to look at it and again look at the KPIs and how it's presented for better understanding of the members. We will look at it.
Yeah, and
okay.
Sorry, Chair, just one very final point. You know, I would invite you to ask us questions around if 78% of return interviews were undertaken in that quarter, why weren't the 22% undertaken? Because that's the challenge, where on a practice basis, we need to be able to say to you, it's because the young people declined or this reason, so that you can be assured that in terms of that key safeguarding role around return interviews, we're doing all we can to make sure our children are safe.
Yeah, and I think that's also where the narrative, becomes really important as well. So despite my best intentions, we have jumped head to dashboard 6 and 8, I think. If we just go back to dashboard 1, okay, are there any questions at all on dashboard 1? Okay, Andrew.
So this is on the EHCP issued within 20 weeks. So as the analysis says, performance is much better this year, which is looking great. My question really is on the trend from previous year. It looks like it goes down significantly on Q3, and I was just wondering what the reason for that might be, and is there a way to mitigate that possibly going into Q3 next year to help ensure that it doesn't go below the target, which has been exceeded in the last couple of quarters?
Of course. So if you look at the last year's figures, so the numbers were lower than this year's Q1, Q2. So there were capacity issues, reduced workforce, all those factors impacted the numbers. So this Q3, we are hoping, given the direction of the figures, it's still 85%, 80%, which is above or similar to the national average. It might carry on. I just saw Ming's hand up. So Ming, do you want to come in, please? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. The chair is okay. Coming. Just add one comment.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. It's just Councillor is absolutely right. There's some seasonal pattern. We monitor it very closely. And yeah, very strong. I think last year the Q3 actually dropped, and then I think that's the key thing for make sure we achieve very well now, well above the national average. To maintain that is to know when likely something will happen. What are the key drivers in previous 2 years when the number drop? So we identified a few things. It's not just local authority, can be health service like occupational therapies. They don't have enough people. Can be seasonal change, like lack of people, or they do not have a local worker there. So we preemptively work with them. Sometimes you expect some kind of drop, but the key thing is we want to make sure throughout the years, most of the month, we keep it above the national average. And then we give ourselves, that's why we give ourselves whole years average of 70%. So to answer your question, Councillor, really is to know the driver pretty well. We know the key driver is capacity, local authority capacity, either happen in the first 6 weeks, particularly educational psychologists. Yeah, as you can understand that there's a national shortage challenge of having sufficient education psychologists inputting assessment at the same time they need to carry out consultation in school. And you may also be aware that last year, the end of last year, there was a national association of education psychologists decision to have a partial strike. When I said partial strike, because they just stick to like working hour 9 to 5 o'clock, because the pressure is so much. Many education psychologists have to work very, very long hours. So if we stop doing that, we need to go out to get a local education psychologist. But there's only so many education psychologists. So let's give you an example. There's another factor. We may have a seasonal shortage of staff. That's the main reason, But I think we now keep a very, very close eye on the development. And we are very confident overall in the years we will achieve about the national average.
Thank you. Andrew, any other comments?
Yeah, no, just going to say thank you. That's really clear. Thank you.
Okay, dashboard 2, early help. Any questions? Dashboard 3, the front door. Sorry, Anne.
Sorry. So my question is, there's an issue with timeliness. You say the data has been interrogated, which has led to targeted work to improve timeliness.
Sorry, where are we?
Oh, big. So dashboard item 3, and it's under what action is the service taking?
Right.
Yeah, the data has been interrogated, which has led to targeted work to improve timeliness. And I just wondered, are there some particular pinch points which you've been able to sort of tackle?
Adam, are you coming in on timeliness of assessments here?
Yeah, I was just
Because
about
Adam's
to.
done a very significant piece of work in this regard. Thank you.
So this data here is looking back at obviously a quarter that was a few months ago, and we've been doing significant work with the team and using different data to address the timeframes of assessments and the timeliness of those being completed. And what we've seen is that figure lifting significantly in terms of we achieved 97.8% last month in terms of assessments completed in timeframe. So when that levels out over the quarter, I believe we're reaching near a 77% over the actual quarter period, if we were to see that sort of achievement through. And that's been mirrored in the last 2 months now of achieving a much better rate of assessments in timescales.
And I also wanted to mention here that we are working on monitoring the assessment timeliness daily and working with the team to monitor and look at how many are due in each week and to distribute the workload among the team social workers.
And
right, so it's from what you're saying, you're sort of by monitoring the timeliness, you're reminding people in a way to keep time, and is that how you're achieving better results?
I would say it's a mix, because there will be some occasions where assessments do go over timescale. You have 45 days to complete a child and family assessment, and the majority of those are undertaken in our front door. And the work that we've had working with Sudeshna's team in terms of having much more focused data in relation to worker-based and receiving that daily has enabled us to keep on top of that on a daily basis in terms of chasing, in terms of ensuring they're completed. But of course, there's a balance around the qualitative nature of those assessments as well.
Right, so you're keeping on top of the data coming in, and that's helping you to keep you all to good time. Okay, thank you.
If I could just say, this is one of the key corporate indicators. So we're reporting on this corporately. It is a really significant indicator. So it's, you know, what Adam Sudeshna have described there is a really significant improvement in performance, and that high 90s is a really good indicator of positive, responsive practice. So we really need to keep in those high 90s. Thank you.
And I don't understand trite, but when we're talking about timeliness, if I've understood this correctly, we're not just measuring assessments completed within in this instance, the 45 days. We're actually monitoring throughout the process. Is that correct?
So we don't wait until the end of the 45 days. We have different assessments may have a 25-day, and we check in with a supervision at the 25 days, and that's built in. So we don't. And then what we're doing with the daily timeframes, the daily data, we'll be able to monitor and track those. And what we're trying to do is reduce the average time frame that assessments take. So when you look across the piece, the average time for an assessment is about 37 days. Of course, there'll be some that are higher, some that will be lower. And the idea is to try and drive that down a bit to give us more capacity for when people are off or when the workload increases.
Yeah. Thanks for raising that, Anne. Any other questions? No. Dashboard 4, child protection. Dashboard 5, children in care. Dashboard 6, care leavers. Andrew?
Yeah, I just had a very quick question about the first measure, which is percentage of care leavers 18 to 24 in touch. Obviously, it's still above 90%, which I think is the target, which is great. It's because obviously it's gone down slightly. My sort of question is, because obviously the other factors sort of depend on this percentage in touch because they're all related to that. Do we know whether ones who are not in touch are more likely to be NEET or in unsuitable accommodation? And is that why they're out of touch, because they're in unstable accommodation and things and are harder to reach? Or do we know whether it reflects the opposite, that they're not in touch because actually everything's going fine and therefore they don't feel that they need to be in touch? I mean, I guess it's hard because they're not in touch, so we don't. But do we have any indication as to which way around it might be?
Okay, can can I come in here? So from the data, we can see that those who are not in touch, they're mostly in independent accommodation. From the last time they had been in touch, most of them are in independent accommodation.
Sorry, Adam, me and Adam are both trying to come in together, so I'll give way to Adam because it's.
Well, I was gonna. There you go. Then I was gonna say I think that's a very complicated question that was asked. I think it'll be very different for different young people, and I think if you notice the age range there, it's up to the full 25 in terms of they're approaching that age. And there are a number of care leavers. There'll be a very few number that may be not in touch, who may be missing. I think there's one or two that are missing, and therefore we're not in touch with. Even as adults, we still keep them open if they're missing. But there'll also be those who've maybe sort of left us in terms of not wanting that support and therefore not sustaining that. And then what we'll do with those over 21s is decide whether we keep those cases open or not in the longer term.
Andrew, anything further on that?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, moving on. Dashboard 7. Anne?
Sorry, thank you. It's good to keep these statistics. I was just wondering, you hear that nationally something like 20% of children are not attending school. Is that the case? And is that the case in this borough? Thank you.
In our Wokingham schools, our absence percentage figures are much better than national average. So, so most of our children are in school, and there are less percentage of children who are not attending school for even a long term. So our absence figures are higher. The attendance figures are higher than national average.
Oh, well, that's good. Thank you.
Yes.
And just for clarification, do those figures include all children in local authority and all academies? Or are there any exceptions?
No, they include all academies, free schools and maintenance schools in Wokingham.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Anne. Anybody else on dashboard 7? Dashboard 8, Children's Services Workforce.
So here I want to mention about the Q2 figure.
Yeah. It's
13.33%. And there has been an amendment of the Q1 figure. It's actually 10.53% for the 12 months rolling turnover of permanent qualified social workers.
Sorry, could you just repeat that?
Yes, I think it will be good if I can quickly share my screen, just down here. So the Q2 23-24 is 13.33%, which has gone up slightly from the Q1 figure, which is 10.53%. So Q1 figure has been amended, and this is the Q2 figure.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Any questions at all about that dashboard? Well, thank you very much, Sudesha and Mark. Your input's been very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Agenda item 64, the education update. Is that right? Yes, yeah, education update. Okay, so that is in the supplementary pack that we had. Okay. So, good evening, Gillian.
Good evening, colleagues. So I will work on the basis that everybody has had sight of the report and just highlight a couple of things. So as you will see, the second half of the autumn term was incredibly busy with Ofsted inspections. And you will see the outcomes of those inspections that we have published to date at that point of writing in the report there. And I will just draw attention to one that I'm sure councillors will be particularly interested in, and I can see you smiling already, Chair, and that is the outstanding judgment that was awarded to Chiltern Way. And the good news, obviously, for all of the other schools who were rated as good or remained good, and I congratulate all of those schools on those particular outcomes. As always, I've included the information for you on the Ofsted process and the guidance for you. And you'll be aware that we have a new Chief Inspector of Schools who took up post this month. With some action being undertaken currently and inspections being paused for schools until the 22nd of January, whilst specific training takes place for all inspectors at the moment around mental health and well-being. And then I just draw your attention to the further work of the Education Partnership team following those golden threads. And this time around, colleagues, I've just highlighted to you the inclusive practice work that we've been engaged in, and we'll be able in the future to give you more information once we have the Southampton University research project completed towards the summer term. And we previously spoke about the multi-ethnic dimension to the borough and the increasing racial equity work that we're undertaking. So I've given you some further information there about our new arrivals and refugees. And then I wanted to flag with you a significant piece of work that we were doing during the autumn, which was around our Wokingham Schools Hub, which is our online digital presence for the schools community. And I've popped the link to that hub in the report for you, and I would encourage colleagues to have a browse through the hub. It is intended for education professionals, and if you wanted to access some of the material, you would need a login. Some of it is traded material, so it is commercially sensitive because we charge some schools to access some of those materials. But if you'd like to have a look, you can certainly browse the headlines, and I've just given you a screenshot of the overview of the type of material that the website contains for our local professionals. So I'll leave it to questions, Chair.
Thank you, Gillian, and wonderful to see these Ofsted reports. Okay, and I know that every member, will also wish to congratulate, all of the schools, for that, for those achievements. I think it's also really interesting, and thank you for including this information about the schools hub. Is this a new initiative, or is it something that has been in place for some time?
So we've had the schools hub for many years, actually, okay. But as part of the digital upgrade across the wider council, we had the opportunity to completely review and revamp and modernise what we were offering to schools, which has been a great opportunity. So I just thought it was worth sharing with you at that kind of revamp opportunity, what we have now in place.
Absolutely, thank you. Does anybody have any questions at all on the education update? Nope. Okay.
Can I just say to the committee that I did contact Chiltern Way to congratulate them, because I think that is a huge thing that they have achieved. Remarkable from when you think what that school was like 2 or 3 years ago and what they've done with it. It's really very, very pleasing to see, and such a good environment now for the children that need it.
Yeah. Wonderful for the children and their families, but also significant contribution to provision within the borough. So, very pleasing indeed. Okay, agenda item 65, review of the post Ofsted improvement plan. Is that you, Helen?
Yes, I think a few of us may do a little bit of input here, but we'll keep it brief because we know members have had the report. So, colleagues, you'll recall we had the full Ofsted ILACS inspection in March. We're required to have an improvement plan, and we brought the first iteration of the improvement plan in front of this committee in September. And the report highlights where the areas of development were particular to that inspection. We've recently met with the lead inspector in October, It was a productive, helpful conversation. Clearly, the lead inspector had very significant knowledge and understanding over the 3-week period that he engaged with us about children's services in Wokingham. But in response to meeting with him, we have taken the opportunity to actually review and to improve, we believe, the structure of the improvement plan. So you have a version that is different to the version that you saw in September. We think it more clearly summarises what we have done. We have a concise summary of activity completed. Where we need to do more, we're clear about that, and we have a more dedicated space in the improvement plan to consider impact. So what you have in front of you is our update as to where we are in December, as of December 2023. We do have monthly improvement board meetings. This is a very, clear focus for us in terms of how we deliver the level of improvement that we'd like to see. I think we've highlighted in a previous conversation the timeliness of assessments, which was one of the key areas for improvement. But I think we'll probably leave it at that and see if there are any further questions. Thank you.
Ian? Thanks. Yeah, I thought it was a well presented report, actually. Very helpful. I've got a couple of questions. Most of the dates that are given are in green because I think that means that we're beyond those and it looks like they're done. So well done. But there are two of them. One is in amber and one is in red. I think we probably know what that means. If I can draw your attention to those, just for a little bit of clarification, that's all. Para 1.3 says January 2024, and that's in amber. I suspect that means we're at risk of possibly not making that one.
Yes, I don't know if any. Oh, Adam's come on screen. Adam, do come in.
So we have recruited, but they're not starting for a number of months until they're started. That one on the 1.3.
But the difficult bit's done. So
yeah, I would say
the
recruitment is the bit we sometimes struggle with. But we've
managed that. That's right. Particularly, you have to go out again and again to try and do the recruitment. So well done. Para 7.3. It's got December 2023 in red. That looks like we have definitely missed that one.
Sorry, I'm
7.3.
finding it difficult to see where we are. Sorry, because I've got a black and white copy of that report.
Okay. Oh, that's not helpful, is it? Sorry, I was looking at it online this afternoon. So there you go.
Page 104. Thank you. See if colleagues who are on the line want to come in.
It's the care leaver supervision policy.
Oh, here's Adam.
Yeah, not to add much clarity on that. I would need to seek a specific update on that. Obviously, we've just passed December relatively recently. Not trying to give an excuse here, but in terms of establishing what the position is with that currently.
Okay. Any further questions? Andrew?
It's more of a just general question. I mean, the idea that you've got that sort of follow-up meeting after 6 months with the officer inspector actually seems quite positive, and I don't know if that exists in schools, but that sounds quite good. Is there any other further follow-up that you can have before the next inspection to sort of reassure that it is on the path to being good the closer we get to the re-inspection?
Okay, I mean, we could be inspected at any time from now. So any Monday morning, we could get a call from Ofsted. So we know we had the full 3-week inspection in March last year. We're anticipating we will get a call probably before March for a short focused visit or a JTI, a joint targeted area inspection. We didn't have to have a meeting with our lead inspector, but we we thought on balance, it would be a very positive thing to do because, you know, he had in-depth knowledge and understanding. He got to know us, we got to know the team very well over the 3 weeks. And therefore we thought it was, you know, very helpful to get his perspective. But unfortunately, you know, we will not have another opportunity, and we may not meet that same lead inspector again. Usually Ofsted has some consistency, but it may be someone else from the team that we meet in future. So it's very live, and you know, we cannot anticipate when a call will come, but be sure there will be one soon. Thank you.
That's a very helpful question and answer. Thank you for that. So any further questions? Yes, thank you very much. Okay, moving on. Item 66, executive member update.
Thank you. I think we've covered nearly everything in this meeting, so there's not a lot left. The one thing that hasn't come up is children's homes, and we have purchased 3. They are in the process of recruiting for the care manager and the staff and registering, because we have to get the homes approved before we can use them. We are hoping that they will be operational probably just at the beginning of the next financial year, sometime in the spring, sometime around then. We can't predict exactly because we don't control the length of time it takes to do the registration, which is probably about 8 weeks, something like that. But they're coming, and I think they're a really positive thing. I wanted to report back to this committee. We had a really lovely care leavers Christmas lunch on the 22nd of December, which I know Andrew was at, which I enjoyed. I even enjoyed doing the wiping up, and Adam Manfred did a load of washing up. I cannot believe how much washing up he did. It was a really lovely lunch. The PAs did a really good job with the food. It was a really nice occasion. And the other thing I want to say is about school place planning. So Ming and the team have done a massive piece of work, particularly peers I'd like to commend on planning, forward planning for school places. And we're not quite ready to publish, but we're getting there. And I think there are challenges, but we're winning. So I think we will be okay on school places when this comes out. But it's been a massive piece of work because it's a very difficult thing to wrestle with about how many children we've got and where they're going to come from, and trying to guess and predict. But there's a big piece of work, so I think something will be coming into the light of day shortly, and I'm really pleased to see that.
And I see that school sufficiency basis unit is on the agenda for our March meeting. So Anne.
Yeah, sorry, I should have asked this in the member question time, but it went past very, very quick. And but I think it's appropriate for Prue. I've been advised that the Forest School has been promised £600,000 to convert the school to co-ed, but there's been some doubt whether they'll receive that.
Not exactly. So we have somebody who's gone around the school to identify what they actually need. They've been asked to prioritise the things. So it will be things like girls' changing rooms and toilets, those kind of things. I'm not sure where they've got to with updating our property team with that, but they needed our specialist help with that. There is money being put aside. The exact amount is not confirmed. I know we had a meeting with them just before Christmas, and I think Helen can probably update you a bit more.
I'm just noticing that Ming's hand has gone up on the screen. Thank you.
Thank Helen and Chair. Yeah, probably Councillor Bray already said that. Yes, 600K have been put aside. I said that. Now the trustee of the school and a head teacher, they have a view. They were exploring whether they want to self-manage the conversion and the project-related work or not. So we are in the process discussing with the trustee exactly how they want to do it. We're waiting for them to get back to us. But in terms of money, we did identify 600K.
There's definitely a pot of money for them to help them.
Yeah.
They got quite excited because they got confused about some of the figures that were in things and thought that we had a vast pot of money that was available to schools, which is not the case, as you will know. But we have colleagues have been out to look around the school with them. We've had a meeting with them before Christmas, and I'm not sure, because it's only just before Christmas, I don't know whether they fed back what their priority order of stuff was yet. But I'm sure we can find that out and progress it. But it is progressing, and they will get support, financial support. And obviously, it's important because the school has to be ready to take girls in September, and we hope it will be. In fact, we're sure we will be. I would like to be. That's a bit stronger than hope.
So, what you're saying sounds slightly less certain. What Ming said.
I'm trying to tell you where we've got to in the process, rather than say yes or no. They've got money. There is a pot of money. It's going to be tight, I think, but no, we have got the money for them, and we haven't changed our minds on it being available or any of those things. It still is. They somehow got the idea that something had shifted, and it hadn't shifted. So, yeah.
Right, and then I've just got another thing also about the forest. They've had quite a bad leak through a roof in the last few days, and it would have been something where somebody would have had to be there around the clock because it was such a fast leak. The bins would have needed to be changed every hour or something. What does the school do?
Well, they're an academy, so I'm afraid they're responsible for dealing with that. They can ask us for assistance, but it's because they're an academy, they don't even have to tell us that that's happened. And I don't know whether they have, because it's news to me. So it's possible they've been in touch with officers, but I'm afraid academies deal with that themselves. That's how it works.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Any other questions to Prue? No. Thank you, Prue. Moving on. Agenda item 67, the forward plan. We could just turn to the agenda pack, beginning page 110. The next meeting will be on the 20th of March, which might possibly include the Youth Council, or we might decide with them on an alternative strategy. Any questions at all about the items for the 20th of March? And that's it. We do have two unscheduled items that are listed at the end. Okay. I don't know how we deal with those.
I was just going to add is that in January, in the next council meeting, the timetable of meetings will be agreed, and then I'll populate the rest of the dates, and then perhaps if Helen or other senior officers want to tell me when, then once the dates were agreed, when we can schedule those.
Okay, thank you, Lucian. So if I've understood that correctly, after the January meeting of council, we'll have the meeting dates, and then we can begin to produce the forward plan beyond March. Yeah, so we'll talk with the vice chair and exec member and officers, and then come up with some proposals, for all the members. Is that okay? Everybody happy with that? Yep. Thank you very much. The action tracker, which begins on page 113. I don't have any questions on pages 113 or 114. 113. On page 114, I'm just wondering whether, and it's unfortunate Sarah's not here this evening, whether Sarah and Rebecca might have met regarding communications between drivers and escorts. Maybe we can check that. maybe via an email to Sarah or Rebecca. I thought that had happened, but I think it's described as being, is it still being described as ongoing? Yes, as ongoing. Okay. Yeah.
I want to say something about the one at the bottom of page 114, the holiday activities and food programme. The government have not announced whether they are continuing the funding for that or not. So we just don't know. At the moment, they didn't say they weren't funding it, but on the other hand, they haven't said they were. So it is possible that the money will stop shortly, and then we won't be able to fund it because we don't have the resources. We're reliant on government grants, like all local authorities, on that. So we're waiting to find out what the government are going to announce. I think we've got enough to keep going to Easter. And then we'll have to know, but they didn't announce it till quite late last year. The LGA thinks they're going to say they're not giving the money.
May I ask if the council has been doing any lobbying of our?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe they would. Okay. The page 115, the 1st of November. Our request for the leader of the council to write to other local authorities regarding funding for the US care leavers. I know that Lucianne wrote to Stephen Conway almost immediately after our meeting on the 17th of November. I'm just wondering whether Stephen has written that letter.
He has, and he's written some other letters as well. And so has the council about this issue and USC in general, and there've been a number of developments, but we haven't seen any more money.
Okay, so perhaps if the action tracker could be updated to reflect that, and then again also from the 1st of November, there were recommendations to investigate development of a survey to gather data on complaints and compliments, and to include the process for logging complaints and compliments in the local offer. Now, I believe progress has been made, is being made in the second of those. Okay, I don't know if you could elaborate on that. I don't know about the first. No, if perhaps we could check both of those, then Lucianne, that would be
There has been correspondence about complaints recently, yes, and about the navigation of the system.
Yes.
Which are being looked at, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, Ming, would you like to say something on that?
Yes, there has been cross-departmental joint work. I think the customer service and the sales service developing this sort of procedure in the local offer that's already been taking place.
Yeah. Okay, that was my understanding as well. So yeah, we'll probably leave that as ongoing though. Okay, so thank you very much for that. Okay, anything else on, anybody else have any questions or comments at all about the action plan? Okay, agenda item 69, part 2, exclusion of the public. Exclusion of the public, that under section 100A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act as amended as appropriate. Okay, so the live streaming has ended. So back to you, Jill.